Jason, Mia, we consider them family, co-workers. Tommy, I didn't know you were going to make it so hard for me to get up this morning to talk when I met you a couple of weeks ago. Good to see you. What I'd like to do this morning is talk to you about men's health, probably more appropriately titled, It's Not All Taboo. So during the course of this talk, let's see, we've got our, let's get our pointer on here. So we're working on that. So this morning, what we'll do is we will talk about cancer. We will talk about cardiovascular disease. We'll move on to diabetes. And then we will also talk about depression and HIV. Okay. We'll talk about HIV during this talk. So let's have the first slide. So, what? Okay. Thank you. So there's a little bit of confusion around men's health today. Okay. So there's a little bit of discrepancy about men, how men see themselves, and how men actually live. So if you talk to the average man in America, about 80% of them will say, you know, I'm in pretty good health, or I'm in very good health. All right, reasonable, okay? So if you go through and you talk to men about their exercise and activity, they'll say, yeah, I get about 20 minutes to 45 minutes worth of exercise 3 times a week. About half of the people will tell you that, all right? I mean, is that surprising to anyone? All right. Let's look at the truth, all right? Tim will tell you, I'm about the truth, right? All right, so about 1/5 of the men in America are current smokers. It's really hard to be healthy and smoke at the same time, right? Okay? About 75% of men are obese or overweight. It's really hard to be healthy and overweight, right? All right. So about 30% of the men have high blood pressure. As we'll talk about a little later today, it's hard to have high blood pressure and have a healthy heart. It's hard to have high blood pressure and functioning kidneys. It's hard to have high blood pressure and not have a stroke. All right? And then a little bit more than 10% of the men in America have been diagnosed with diabetes, the mother of all diseases. As I alluded to earlier, we'll first talk about cancer, specifically prostate cancer and colorectal cancer, both of which have a devastating effect upon our men. We'll then move to the issues of obesity and cardiovascular disease. And again, by way of disclosure, I'm going to kind of breeze over those topics because I really want to get to some topics that we don't really talk about in our community, but yet they take members of our family every day. All right? So we're going to spend some time talking about depression. We're going to spend some time talking about HIV and AIDS, okay? Now, understand, I'm a cancer surgeon. I call myself a simple surgeon. I don't know a lot about a lot of stuff. I confess that. So I brought some friends with me that we'll introduce a little later here. I've got a journalist. I've got a teacher. I've got a professional football player, a comedian, a medical school classmate, an activist, health activist, and a woman by the name of Nell, and I'll introduce you guys to them throughout the course of our time together this morning. I think we've got a little glitch. Next slide, please. Okay. So first, let's talk about, can we get the next slide moved up? So again, colorectal cancer and prostate cancer will be the first focus of the talk. So let's talk about prostate cancer first. How many of you have known someone to have prostate cancer? All right. How many of you have known men to die from prostate cancer? How many of you have had men who are in your family die from prostate cancer? All right. Pretty prevalent, very prevalent in fact. And in fact, 1 of 6 men in the United States will have prostate cancer. Those numbers are very similar to those of women having breast cancer, all right? So this coming year, we'll have almost 250,000 men diagnosed with prostate cancer, and unfortunately, 30,000 men will leave this earth due to this disease, which is very, very, very preventable. Prostate cancer is preventable, okay? So, Dr. Stewart, what causes someone to get prostate cancer? Unhealthy lifestyles, i.e., if you're not eating right, you're not exercising, if you've got a family history. Unfortunately, Dr. Hash, as you get older, you get a risk factor, and there's nothing we can do about that, right? We can't do anything about age and smoking. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So let's look at some numbers here about prostate cancer and why prostate cancer is very insidious in our community. As you see here, we have over here in the left column, racial and ethnic groups. We have the incidence of cancer, and we have the deaths from cancer per 100,000 individuals. And what you'll see here is that across the group, about 168 per 100,000 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer, and about 30 of 100,000 men will die from prostate cancer. But if you look at those numbers a little closer, you'll see a hidden story. And this is a story that shouldn't be so hidden, and that's why I'm here with you this morning, is that you see that the incidence of prostate cancer is about 256 in African American men. If you look up and down that left column, nobody else has 256 cases of prostate cancer, right? If you look at white males, we're about 50% higher. If you look at Hispanic males, we're also about 80% higher. That's just an incidence, all right? So that's part of the story is the incidence. Now let's talk about how many men die from prostate cancer, which is really where the money is, okay? African American men, 62.3 deaths per 100,000. So I invite you to look up and down the right-hand column. Do you see anybody else that has that many cases, how many deaths from prostate cancer? And again, these are 2010 data. If you're a white man, you've got about 21.5, which is about 3 times lower risk of dying from prostate cancer. Hispanic men have about the same incidence of death. So it's a problem. It's a real problem in our community because if you get it and if you don't pay attention to it, it will take you from this earth. Tim, we talked about this before, right? I'm about telling the truth. Next slide. All right, so how is this preventable? Number one, you have to get screening exams, and I know there's been a lot of controversy started by a friend of mine, Otis Brawley, about what appropriate screening is, whether or not you need to have digital rectal examinations, whether or not you need to get your blood drawn every year, and we could talk about that for about an hour, okay? And like I told you, I brought professional football players, doctors. I didn't bring Otis with me this morning, though. So talk to your doctor about prostate exams. At bare minimum, you need to get a digital rectal examination once you hit 50 years of age. And to be honest with you, I like to tell African American men that we need to get that first digital rectal examination by the age of 40 years old, okay? Because again, our family history of prostate cancer is higher and the death rate is much higher. It's a simple examination, all right? What happens if you get it, all right? Now, there are a lot of folks, you know, my father-in-law had prostate cancer diagnosed when he was 77 years of age, and he went to his doctor up in Philadelphia. Actually, he went to a couple of doctors in Philadelphia, and some of them said, you know, you're getting up there in age, Jim. You don't necessarily have to do anything about it. We could put you on hormones. That's called watchful waiting, understanding that, you know, as sure as we are born, we're going to die, and prostate cancer is probably not going to be the thing that will kill you if it's caught in an early stage. Younger men tend to go for either having removal of the prostate cancer or removal of the prostate gland, which is called a prostatectomy. We have a number of ways to do that now, many of which don't really impinge upon your quality of life, but that is an option. Another option is to have radiation therapy for your prostate. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you get prostate cancer and it's diagnosed by your doctor fairly early, i.e. with that digital rectal examination, and it hasn't really spread anywhere, you know, in cancer we talk about 5-year survival. That is pretty much our standard end game, all right? You've got about 100% chance of making that if you've got prostate cancer that's caught only when it's within the prostate gland, okay? Let's say it moves over to a lymph node or two that's diagnosed during prostatectomy. Again, you've got about a 100% chance of living for 5 years. But let's say if your prostate cancer is diagnosed when it's spread to the bone. You've got about a 1 in 3 chance of making it 5 years. Prostate screening is a simple examination. You go from 100% survival in 5 years to see your child graduate, see your grandchildren graduate, to about a 1 in 3 chance, just by not going to the doctor and getting a simple examination. We've got to do better than this. Let's move to the next slide. So, I brought 2 of my first friends with you because they know this better. They know this story better than I do. They've lived through it. Let's start the first movie, please. All right, this is a film that was produced by the National Cancer Institute.
Most African American men have this general tendency that we are all powerful, all knowing, and we are invincible. So therefore, it may happen to you, but it won't happen to me. When I was first given the final word in terms of diagnosis that yes, in fact, Edgar Brookins, you have cancer. First, there was a mental stoppage. I said, wait, the reality that it actually is was overwhelming initially. Black men in particular have a certain fear factor that I don't want to hear that message. I don't want to hear what the doctor may tell me. And that's a negative for them, but I know I used to procrastinate that way. Say, well, I'm not going to go. If I just don't go, do some miracle is just going to disappear. It doesn't happen that way. It does not happen.
For years, 2, 3 years, I never went to the doctor. So I thought I was all right. But I had no idea. I had no idea.
When the doctor told me that I had cancer, the first thing that went through my mind was just fear. The fear and the unknown were the 2 things that were just troubling me more than anything else that ever happened in my life. When I think of cancer, I think of my aunt and my mother who I lost both to cancer. As a family, we never really talked about cancer. Cancer is not something that we would sit down at a dinner table and talk about. I wish that I could have been more open and supportive of my mother and my aunt. I wish that I could have gotten more information from them about what they were going through and how they felt. I wish I would have been able to just, on my own, go to the National Cancer Institute website and learn for myself. We as African American men, we need to change our conversations. We talk about everything other than what's really important to us, and that's number 1, that's our health.
We got to be more communicative within our communities, within our families, particularly in a church setting, because we know the church has a great influence on what black men do or don't do. And we say, hear it from the pulpit. Preachers got to get more involved in this thing, and they're not doing that. Preachers got to say it from the pulpit why the black man needs to be more aggressive in their medical care on a continuous basis.
Being diagnosed with prostate cancer, I guess you could look at it from 2 different points of view. One from a single man's point of view and one from a family man's point of view. Let's take the single man's point of view first. That's me. I really found other excuses why I can't go to the doctor and get checked. Now, on the other hand, if you're a married man, the first thing that you worry about is your family.
The effect it had on my family was fairly singular in the fact their concern obviously was raised, concern that, Dad, will you be okay? Dad, are you going to be around? As a father, as a head of a household, you got to get those medical things taken care of, which include not just the doctor, but physical exercise, your diet, etc. All those things combine to create a healthy status will allow you to do what you do as a parent.
We worried so much about our manhood, and if you go to the doctor early and get checked, and the doctor tells you you're all right, then you don't have to worry about your manhood. You don't have to worry about your manhood, but you have to be a man first to find out. And the only way you can find out is you got to go to the doctor.
And that's an individual responsibility that we have to step up if we plan to be around and to live a healthy lifestyle, to be a contributing person to our community, and to provide assistance to others that if I'm in a health status that doesn't allow me to do so physically, then I'm cheating everyone else and I'm cheating myself in the process. So you got to step up to the plate, as we said, man up now and do it. Yes, I have cancer. Yes, I'm going through the treatment. But hey guys, look at me. I'm still doing the normal stuff that I normally do, doing my work, doing my social stuff, so it has not impeded my life.
To me, this is a very powerful example of why we have to man up now so that we don't become one of those 30,000, or our family members don't become one of the 30,000 men who die from prostate cancer every year. All right? So let's move on to colon cancer. All right? 17,000 African Americans will die of colon cancer this year. This isn't me talking. These are the data from the National Cancer Institute. All right, we're up to 47,000 people now, all right, by preventable diseases, okay? Now, many of these deaths are preventable due to either lifestyle changes or screening, all right? So let's first talk about lifestyle changes. Again, not me talking, the data. Alcohol consumption, if you drink more than three drinks a day, you're at increased risk of colon cancer. Exercise. It's not me talking, it's the data, okay? Exercise. Aspirin intake, you know, you'll read about that in the paper. Aspirin, I think, is supposed to be the new magic drug. It stops heart attacks, it stops strokes, it stops melanoma. Now the data are saying potentially it stops colon cancer. I think that is reasonable, but be forewarned is that if you take too many aspirin, you get a risk of having an ulcer, stomach bleeding, so on and so forth. The baby aspirin, 80 milligrams a day is fine, but let's not overdo it. Now, I know many of you didn't know you were going to come to church to hear Steve Harvey, but it's my wife's cousin. I had to invite him. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right. Now, Steve Harvey's going to talk to us about screening. All right. If you're older than 50, you need to start having screening. If you've had a first-degree relative, a mother, father, brother, sister, who's had colon cancer, or if you've got inflammatory bowel disease, you need to start earlier. But we're talking about people who are at average risk, okay? Now, there are about 3 ways that people say you can do this screening, all right? You can do an annual fecal blood test, which is where your doctor takes 3 samples of your stool and tests them with an occult blood test on a card, but you need to have a little scope inserted in your rectum every 5 years that only goes up to the bottom part of your colon. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is what we call a double contrast enema, where you'll get some contrast followed by some dye injected into your rectum, and then they'll take a picture, and if they see anything that's a little weird, you'll have a colonoscopy. The third way to do it is to have a colonoscopy every 10 years, again, starting at about age 50. This is me talking now. I actually prefer colonoscopy, not that I've had one, but what it does is that it allows the doctor to take a good look at your colon through and through, and if there are any suspicious areas, they can biopsy that area during the initial procedure. Okay, next slide. This will be so this is Steve Harvey and actually one of my classmates, Dr. Jennifer Christie, who's at Emory University, speaking about colonoscopy and Steve Harvey's experience.
They talking about implementing the draft and upping the age. Tell you what, stay away from my age group.
I've been in this business since I was 28. I constantly tour. I got a syndicated radio show.
I'm gonna tell y'all something else about this radio show.
You know, I'm a father, I'm a husband, and I'm an author. I mean, if you break down what I do, I tell jokes for a living. But you know, this is serious. You know, I want to live. So they got a test that can prevent colon cancer. You gotta go get it done. It's not that big of a deal. I'm here to put my life on tape. Isn't this fun?
Oh, it is. I say this every day.
I'll be necking in a minute.
This is
a medication list. If you're taking current medicines, write them here.
Okay. I have a secretary, though.
Okay. All right.
Pretty, ain't she?
Okay, yes,
Yeah.
she is.
Always
She is pretty.
bring your wife with you.
What procedure are you anticipating today?
An x-ray?
A colonoscopy.
Okay.
You did a full preparation. Tell me about your preparation.
I took the 2 pink pills at 11:30, and then around 1:30 when the activity started, and I started drinking the solution to half a gallon, and it was absolutely delicious.
Okay. And you've not had anything to eat or drink since last night, correct?
No, I haven't had a single morsel.
Good
Hey,
to meet
Dr.
you.
Christie, how you doing?
Good, good. How are you? I'm fine. How are you doing? Good to meet you.
I strongly suggest that you all get a female doctor too.
A colonoscopy is a procedure in which we insert a thin, flexible rubber tube inside the rectum. It allows us to look at the lining of the colon. We can inspect the colon for polyps. A polyp is a growth that is pretty common in the colon. We think that most cancers develop from a polyp. So what we're going to see now is the image of the colon lining. This is not Mr. Harvey's colon, but it is the typical image that we see when we're looking inside the colon. According to the American Cancer Society guidelines, average risk individuals should start screening at age 50.
Not wait until I'm 52. I'm 2 years in. So, I really should have got it done at 50. So I'm doing this, to get more people aware of it, and let you know, there's nothing to it. You got to get it done. I want to live. I want to see my grandkids. I have no grandkids. I want to see some. Women play a crucial role in this whole thing because, and there was a moment I was going to cancel the procedure. She said, oh, no, you're going. Wanting to live has got to be bigger than the fear of the procedure or oh, that's just an exit only. We only own nothing, go back. Okay, my man, but I tell you what, though. This is how it's done to secure your future, the future for your family and your kids.
We need him to stick around, so we need him to be healthy. When we do a colonoscopy, what we do is we use this wonderful instrument. This is called a colonoscope. It has a camera and a light on the tip of it. It's a thin, flexible tube, and images of the lining of the colon are displayed on a monitor. And during the procedure, we can look for polyps. We can put a wire around a polyp and burn it and snare it off at the same time.
They found 3 little polyps, they take them out right away. She assured me that nothing, no cancer.
After the procedure is done, you don't need to come back for another 10 years.
With all the things I have at my disposal, I didn't know about it. And I think that people are going to have to do more to get the word out because our community does not know about it. You got to use unorthodox methods to get this word out here.
If we can detect colon cancer early, it is highly treatable, and patients have successful recovery from colon cancer treatment. And if colon cancer is detected too late, the outcomes are just not as good.
You get it done, you live. You don't get it done, you're taking a risk. Hey, listen, everybody, to get more life-saving cancer information, please go to www.cancer.org. Or it's simple. You can make a phone call to the American Cancer Society at 1-800-227-2345. Do it today.
So Steve Harvey put it the best way possible. You do it, you leave. You don't get it done, you're taking your chances, okay? Not me speaking, just the facts, okay? It's Sunday, and I know what we do after church. I do it too, and that's eat. So we're going to talk about obesity, and like I told you, we're going to move through this one pretty quickly, all right? Because I'm going to start sweating. Next. So the way we think about obesity, we quantify it in body mass index. How much do you weigh relative to your height? Or you're a little short for your weight is another way to think about So if you take your weight and divide it by your body mass index, which is kind of calculated upon your height, you know, if you've got a body mass index greater than 30, you're considered to be obese. Now, let me give you a little caveat here, is that body mass index is really determined upon your frame, okay? So if you've got a wider frame, such as I do, you know, you've got some room in that body mass index. Not that that makes it right. But, you know, if you're like my wife, if you have a smaller frame, then again, you have less room in that body mass index. Next slide. Okay. So here's kind of an example of how that works out. How many people here are 5'9"? Perfect. All right. 5'9". If you are 5'9" and you weigh 125 to 168 pounds, good shape. 169 to 202 pounds, you're pushing it. 203 pounds and above, then by America's definition, for a medium frame person, you're considered to be obese. Little room for wiggles, but it is what it is. Again, not me talking. I didn't come here to make up stuff this morning. I'm just delivering the facts. All right, next slide. So, obesity is a bad disease because it is not singular in nature. It affects everything from your brain to your toes. We're not going to go through this entire slide, but obesity causes you to have strokes, cataracts, sleep apnea, pancreatitis, certain types of cancer, skin diseases, it even makes your feet hurt. Obesity is bad. Next slide. All right, so what do we do about obesity? All right, number one, exercise. Now, most of us aren't going to do this at the White House like Michelle Obama, but we've got to exercise. Now, there are medical and surgical approaches to obesity, but the data shows that even if you have these medical and surgical approaches, exercise needs to be the center of your lifestyle changes, or else you'll gain the weight right back. Okay? I told you I'd be quick on obesity. Next. So let's talk about cardiovascular disease. And kind of the key for cardiovascular disease is hypercholesterolemia. You know, is your blood cholesterol high? Then we'll move to hypertension, and then we'll talk about heart disease. Okay? So let's first move to hypercholesterolemia. All right. So cholesterol, in and of itself, is a naturally occurring substance in the body. What it does is that it helps you digest food and it helps you make certain hormones. Like, anybody know vitamin D? Okay. Vitamin D's precursor is cholesterol. It's important. Now, there are two types of cholesterol. Okay. There's HDL, which is high-density lipoprotein, which is the good cholesterol. It actually helps your heart and it helps your arteries. And then there's LDL, which is low-density lipoprotein, which can actually build up in your arteries. All right, HDL is good, LDL is bad. Okay, you generally want a total cholesterol that's HDL and LDLs less than 200. You want your HDLs to be above 40 and your LDLs to be below 100. All right. Now, what causes your cholesterol balance to get off track? And again, for risk of sounding like a broken record, unhealthy lifestyle, i.e. exercise and diet. And having a high cholesterol can increase your risk of stroke, heart disease, and a heart attack. All right, cholesterol is nothing to play with. Next slide, please. So let's move to high blood pressure. Hypertension, again, is very common in our community. Some of it is genetic, but the vast majority of it, again, is related to lifestyle. All right? Now, when we talk about pressure, we talk about your blood pressure, your blood vessels' ability to expand and contract when the heart beats and pushes blood through your body. And if your body is unable, or if your blood vessels are unable to contract sufficiently, then you will not only get low blood flow, but you will also cause those organs to fail. All right? So kidney failure, as related to high blood pressure, is because your kidney cells are not getting sufficient blood flow, which provides nutrients. Okay? Strokes, related to high blood pressure is that you're moving blood too fast through your brain. Your brain is a very fine-tuned machine, and if you break those blood vessels in your brain, you will bleed in your brain. Bad deal, right? So normal blood pressure is usually below 120 over 80. High blood pressure is about 140 over 90, and then that's something that's called borderline in between of about 120 to 139, which is the systolic pressure, and then 80 to 89, which is the diastolic pressure on the bottom, okay? High blood pressure is very controllable, very controllable. Exercise and lifestyle changes are usually the first approaches. Then after you move beyond those approaches, then you need to think about medications, okay? But you would really, really, really want to hit that exercise and lifestyle change really hard. Because if you go to medications, there's side effects, significant side effects, right? Men, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Had a friend of mine who had high blood pressure, and I threatened him to put him on some of that medication. Keith was about 30 at the time, and he refused. Not good. Next. All right, heart disease. All right. Now, about 300,000 men are going to die of heart disease this year, and it's the most common cause of death, period. Any population is the most common cause of death, and about 9 million men in the United States have it, and about 5 million have had a heart attack. But interestingly, most folks, just like people thought that they exercised enough, just like they thought that they were in pretty good shape, most men are unaware of this, and they say, look, I got no symptoms. You know, my chest hurting when I walk up a few stairs, that's just getting old. No, that's probably heart disease. A little dizziness when you stand up, probably heart disease. That pain shooting down your arm when you're mowing the yard, probably heart disease. Not me making this up, all right? It's not me making this up. So, again, risk factors, diet and exercise. We know that African American men have a higher rate of heart disease. And again, that's probably related to some of our dietary intake. It's probably related to stress that we suffer. And in fact, there's now another branch of medicine that actually looks at social injustice, such as discrimination and stress and its impact upon health. All right? Age, can't really get around age, okay? But understand, the older you get, the higher your risk of having heart disease. Let's go to the next slide. Okay? Diabetes. All right, and this is kind of the last topic we're going to skim over till we get to the quote-unquote taboo topics. Diabetes is essentially, we call it, what do we call diabetes? Sugar, all right? The sugar. All right. How do we get the sugar? We get the sugar because insulin doesn't take the sugar from our blood into the cells, okay? Now, diabetes come in two flavors, type 1 and type 2. They're both sweet. Type 1, used to be called juvenile diabetes. Kids had it. It's when your pancreas does not secrete enough insulin. And so, again, insulin does not move sugar from your bloodstream into your cells. Type 2 diabetes, which used to be known as adult onset diabetes, is when either you don't make enough insulin or you don't utilize it, okay? In other words, you can make all the insulin you want, but if your body doesn't have the receptors to utilize it, then your sugar's going to be high, okay? Again, risk factors, obesity, health style, sedentary lifestyle, family history, age. All right, again, you can't really do anything about your family history. Can't really do anything about your age. But lifestyle changes and exercise are the key for diabetes. Next slide. So what happens when you get diabetes? Again, we used to call that the mother of all diseases, right? I mean, when you get diabetes, you're at risk of having a number of diseases, right? You're at risk of having stroke. You're at risk of having a heart attack, kidney damage, nerve damage, blindness, cardiovascular disease, amputations, on and on and on. Diabetes is bad. And the approach to that is to make sure that we have healthy diets and to make sure that we talk, okay? We talk about health, and we make ourselves accountable for each other's health, next slide. Now, we're going to close off here with stuff that's not really talked a lot about in our community. I told you we'll talk about cancer, which sometimes is considered taboo. We're going to move to depression, which is semi-taboo. And then we're going to delve into HIV/AIDS, which is really taboo, and that's a problem, all right? So depression, all right? It's a real treatable medical condition, okay? I can tell you, no one on this earth was born angry. That's just not the way it happens, okay? It's a chemical imbalance, okay? And it is a treatable condition, okay? So, Doc, how do I know if I'm depressed? Well, you know, 1 or 2 bad days doesn't make you depressed. We all have bad days, right? I have them. Usually not on the weekends, but I have bad days. All right, so if you have persistent loneliness, worthlessness, loss of interest, if you used to like to play golf and you don't play and it's not related to work or it's not related to other stuff that you do, you might need to think about it, okay? If you have thoughts of death or suicide, then you really need to think about it, okay? You really need to talk to someone about depression. Now, you know, we talked kind of about, you know, a whole new branch of medicine that deals with social justice, et cetera. You know, some of the data now show that depression has a real financial impact upon us, okay? When you're 20 years old and you don't feel like going to work, you're 20 years old and you don't feel like going to school, that's a problem, right? It's hard to make money and it's hard to be upwardly mobile if you don't do any of those things and if you don't contribute to society. Bad disease. And understand that depression is no respecter of money, okay? How many of you know Sean Andrews plays right guard for the Philadelphia Eagles? I forgot I'm in Redskins territory. So, I'm a Cowboys fan, so this is hard for me. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right. All right, let's get this. So let's have Sean Andrews telling his story to Soledad O'Brien.
Depression is an illness that affects more than 14 million Americans every year. Black, white, young, old. But black Americans seek help for depression far less often than whites do. For black men, sometimes it's the stigma of mental illness that prevents them from being open about their struggle with depression. But we spoke to one man who's trying to change that for other black men.
Sean Andrews is much of the strength behind the Philadelphia Eagles' offensive line. But last summer, this 6'4", 330-pound right guard almost sidelined himself.
I talked to my agent and told him that I don't think I'm going to training camp. And
You wanted to quit?
yeah, I wanted to give it up. And he said, well, there's a chance that you could lose a few $1 million. And at this point, I'm like, so what, Rich?
You
I'm
didn't
thinking,
care.
I didn't care.
So you knew something was wrong.
I knew something was wrong.
That something was clinical depression, an illness Andrews says he's battled since grade school. But he'd never talked about it to anyone.
Were you thinking about killing yourself?
I did have some suicidal thoughts. And I was in my truck. I'll never forget, I got up to about 140 miles an hour. And I was thinking, you know, I don't want to be here. And it's funny, just as I was thinking about flipping my vehicle or whatever the case, a picture of my son came across my phone. And the look in his face was, you know, as he didn't know what was going on, but the look was like, why Dad? You know, it was tough.
It stopped you
Yeah.
from killing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
For many black men, depression is a dirty secret they keep hidden. They suffer mental illness as much as white men, but seek help for it only half as often.
African American men generally do not run to the therapist's office when they have a problem.
Very true. I speak for a lot of African American men, and I think a lot of guys will agree that we do, in a sense, have this, not only this wall up, but we feel like we have on this mental armor that we can't be touched.
Health experts say societal pressures faced by black men can cause depression even in those who've achieved success.
You have a job, but the question is, do you think that you have to prove every day that you deserve to be there? These are the kinds of things that I think over time take their toll in terms of our psychological well-being.
I love being here.
For Sean Andrews, a childhood marked by poverty and schoolyard teasing led to feelings of worthlessness that even a multi-million-dollar contract couldn't heal.
In my mind, I still didn't feel like I made it. I still feel like I need to buy this $300,000 car just to make me feel like I'm successful. I wanted people to think more of me than what I was.
Author John Head wrote a book about his 20-year struggle with depression and says the stigma of mental illness keeps many black men from seeking help.
There's this fear that if you admit that you're struggling that way, that you're not living up to what you should be as a black man. The idea of manhood for black men is that you don't struggle with your emotions, you barely have emotions.
Former Surgeon General David Satcher says the silence has a cost in violence and substance abuse.
Many of the people in our criminal justice system are suffering from mental disorders undiagnosed and untreated.
I'm better. I'm a lot better, you know.
Sean Andrews has seen a therapist, is now on medication, and is finally talking.
I always knew something was wrong with me. I always was an angry person.
Shining a light on his own pain in the hopes of helping others out of their darkness.
Sean Andrews says he didn't speak about his depression before because of the shame and embarrassment he felt. He was afraid, he says, of being ridiculed. But now he's bringing attention to the issue, particularly for young people. He's working with an organization that's called Active Minds that helps raise awareness of mental health issues on college campuses.
Okay, so when we think about depression, right, we know probably the ultimate expression of depression is suicide, all right? So there's a very active part of suicide, okay? Very good friend of mine, I think she was a junior in high school when I was in college, actually took her life, okay? And then there's the passive form of suicide, and we call that suicide by proxy, where our young men are acting out in behaviors that will put them in situations where their lives are taken by the authorities, okay? Active suicide, passive suicide. We need to be aware of both of those, okay? So now we're going to move to the last part, and I understand that, it is something that we don't really talk about in our communities, but I think it's important for us to. And I'll tell you two very personal stories about HIV and AIDS that will help you understand why it's important, okay? Growing up in Shreveport, Louisiana, very middle-class neighborhood, had neighbors who were doing great things. Most of the kids in the neighborhood would go to college and just really do well, okay? I'll never forget 1980s. There was a young neighbor who graduated from college, or graduated from high school, went to Tulane University, was in the ROTC, and was an officer in the Navy. Suddenly, this young man wasn't in the Navy anymore. He was home all the time. He looked like he had lost a lot of weight. It was the middle of the summer. He would wear turtlenecks, long sleeves, and we really couldn't figure out what was going on. About 3 or 4 months later, this young man was dead. He was dead from a disease that no one spoke about. He ended up dying in the VA hospital there in Shreveport with his parents and his brother and sister with him, but otherwise he was in isolation from the rest of the hospital. This young man died of HIV/AIDS. He had engaged in some behaviors that we were really unaware of, and it put him at risk during that time. All right, fast forward 13, 14 years later. I was a medical student in Washington, D.C. at D.C. General Hospital, which is no longer open. And my first rotation on the wards was pediatrics, all right? And so we had a very busy pediatrics clinic, and we had a guy who was about 3 years old who came to us, and his chief complaint was, he's just not growing. I mean, this kid was smart as a whip, just wasn't growing. So we admitted him, and the service worked him up for all kinds of nutritional things, and finally did an HIV test, and this young man was HIV positive. 3 years old, not a chance to live. His mother kind of embraced it and understood, The father denied it. And he would come in with a different story every day, like, the playground has needles in it, did he sit on a toilet, et cetera, but, he really didn't embrace the fact that he was incarcerated, came home, engaged in behaviors with the child's mother, and subsequently not only infected the mother, but infected their child. If we don't talk about this, it will happen, okay? It will happen. So let's look at the data. Again, not me. It's the last piece of data I'll show you, I promise. Okay? Let's look at a map of the United States here and look at racial and ethnic disparities in new HIV cases. And this is 9 years ago, but it still holds true. Okay? The light colors are actually, so what this does is that it shows the proportion of HIV and AIDS cases in African American men versus those in white men. Okay? So the darker the color, the higher the proportion. In other words, the darker the color shows that more African American men are infected with HIV relative to white men, okay? So there's some places where you've just got a stone white case because, Iowa. Not me speaking, the data. All right? But let's go to some more populated states like Pennsylvania, Minnesota, North Dakota. But let's look at North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina over on the eastern parts, okay? So our rates are about 4 to 6.9 times that of white males. Data's still the same. These are from the CDC. I'm not making it up, all right? So let's go to our next story, and this story really parallels the story that we talked about our young man at DC General Hospital. Next slide. All right. So what you'll find, this is Gwen Eiffel on PBS Frontline, who was actually the commencement speaker at Wake Forest a couple of weeks ago. And she will first introduce you to Nell, and then she'll introduce you to some activists in the community, particularly around LA, that really brings this story home to us.
As the International AIDS Conference prepares to convene in Washington next week, the Frontline Special tackles the many strands of the disease and its disproportionate effect on the Black community, including the rise in HIV infection among heterosexual women. One of them is a woman named Nell, the mother of 5 and grandmother of 17, whose second marriage was to a man she trusted, a deacon in her church.
It was happy time. We had a lot in common, great sense of humor. We liked to do a lot of things together. The only thing that was kind of different, he was a Raider fan, and I'm Dallas Cowboy fan, so that was a little, didn't quite mix too well, but we got through that. So he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. And so we was engaged for about a year, so we prepared. If you're going to get married in a church, you have to go through the 6-week marriage counseling. So we went through all of that.
The first thing we do is we go over the biblical concept of love, and then we deal with finances, keeping the excitement in your marriage, and then, talking and how to communicate with your wife. 6 major subjects that it deals with.
After the 6 weeks, we was fine. So then we got married. The children was there, the grandchildren. Actually, my grandchildren was my wedding party. And my granddaughters was the little flower girls. So from there, we took off, and he wanted to go on a cruise, and I wanted to go to Disney World because I'm afraid of the water. So we went to Disney World. And the whole while I was there, I was sick. And I didn't think too much about it because, the hustle and bustle trying to get through the wedding, and we both had bad colds, so I was in bed. Basically the whole while I was in bed and couldn't eat and just really sick.
After the honeymoon, months went by and Nell didn't feel any better, but she settled into married life.
So this one particular morning, I was making our bed, and on his side of the bed was his Bible. So, and just kind of disrupted the Bible, and it was unzipped. So all of the content of it fell out. So when I was trying to get it back in, he wasn't there. I was trying to get it back in. I just felt like I had been invading his privacy, so I was hurrying up trying to get it back in. And this letter that I could not put back in its proper place, it was a letter from the blood bank. So at first I didn't want to open it, but I had this burning, it was like, you need to read that. I can't express to you what that feeling was, but it was like, you must read this. So I did. I opened it up and I read it. And it started off saying, informing him that he had been diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, and that he should, seek medical, attention. And this letter was dated a year before we got married. So at that time, I read it and I read it. I could not believe it. So, excuse me. But during that time, I still didn't put it together, why I had been sick or ill or anything. So I sat him down and I asked him, was there something that he forgot to share with me before we got married? And he said, no, we have no secrets. I told you everything. And I said, I'm going to ask you again. Is there something that you forgot to tell me before we got married? And he said, no again. And I said, now I'm going to ask you again. Think about this before you answer this time. And I asked again. And he said, no, there is nothing. Everything about me, you know. And that's when I showed him the letter. I said, well, did you forget to tell me this? And at that time, he said, I tried to tell you, but I was afraid I would lose you if I had told you. And I said at that time, no. How could you love me and keep such a secret from me? This is the worst kind of betrayal that anyone could do, to anybody. I said, this is not love.
2 weeks later, Nell discovered she too was HIV positive. Of the more than 1 million Americans living with HIV, with one new diagnosis every 10 minutes, government statistics show more than half are black. For a broader look at an epidemic many Americans believe had faded, we're joined by Phil Wilson, the director of the Black AIDS Institute in Los Angeles. He's also featured in tonight's documentary. Hello, Phil Wilson. Half of these cases are black. Why is there such a disproportionate impact in the black community?
Well, Gwen, a number of reasons. One, AIDS initially was mischaracterized as a white gay disease. And as a result of that, we got a slow start in the black communities. HIV is also a disease of sexual networks. And so while we were not paying attention, if you will, the virus had a chance to take hold in our communities, and we have been playing catch up all along. The second part of it is that the resources have not been in place in black communities to appropriately fight the epidemic. And the third reason is quite frankly, a story of a lack of leadership. Only recently have we started to take the kind of ownership and have we started to experience the kind of leadership necessary to really fight the epidemic appropriately.
Is it also a factor in which there's the stigma stronger in the African American community, the silence, the secret keeping, the fear?
I don't necessarily know if the stigma is stronger, but I do believe that the ramifications are more severe. that I think that for black people, we are in greater need of the sanctuary that comes in our racial ethnic communities. And as a result, the sacrifice that's necessary that can happen when you're stigmatized can be more severe. And I think that so we experience it in a more severe way, and that undermines our ability to talk about HIV in an appropriate manner.
We should have saw the story of the woman from California. And now, how is it that, when was it that this disease went from being, as you described, a gay white male disease to affecting women and children so broadly?
Well, you know, Gwen, it never was really a white gay disease. It was characterized that way. But from the very beginning, black people were disproportionately impacted. We represented 25% of the cases in the early days, and black women were always disproportionately impacted. And part of the challenge that we're fighting is the disconnect. When you're talking about a disease like HIV, people don't want it to be about them, and when they're told that it's not about them, all the more reason for them not to pay attention. But what has happened in black communities over time, because of the way that HIV works and that no one is really safe, the virus has had a chance to take a hold in our community and particularly take a hold among black women, young people, but it continues to be a problem among black, gay, and bisexual men as well.
Now, you said that this is a problem that could have been nipped in the bud long ago. Is it being nipped in the bud now? Is there enough awareness now?
There certainly is not enough awareness now, but we're doing a much better job than we were doing. I'm optimistic that this film will help, because this film not only addresses where we've been and addresses some of the problems, but it speaks to some of the things that are working and some of the potential that we have, some of the hope that we have to bringing about the end of the AIDS epidemic. We certainly are seeing a much greater awareness in black communities, and we are seeing much greater involvement among black leadership than we have in the past.
You know, Phil, in this film, there's also Magic Johnson participates and talks about his diagnosis and how he has continued to live with the virus all these years after his very famous declaration about his status. Did that serve to make the disease more invisible in some ways? People said, well, Magic's fine, then it must be fine.
Well, I actually think that the work that Magic has done and is doing is really important, because, Gwen, here's the deal. We actually can end the AIDS epidemic in black communities. We have those tools. And the message that we have to get out to black folks is that we can win this battle. Together, we are greater than AIDS. But there are a few things that we have to do. We have to get informed about the disease. Knowledge is a powerful tool. Number two, we have to get tested. Now, there's no reason why we don't know our HIV status. You know, many of the barriers that made it difficult for people to find out their HIV status, they're gone away. Last week, the FDA approved an at-home test. Now, today, it has never been easier or more important to know your HIV status. The next message is that treatment are available. I've been living with HIV for 32 years now. No, Magic is alive today. I'm alive today because we are on treatment. Now, but Gwen, the other part of the story is that AIDS, people are still dying from AIDS who are not on treatment. And so I think that Magic saying you can live your life if you do something, that's an important message, and that's a message that we need to spread in our communities.
The title of the documentary tonight is Endgame. Do you see an endgame in sight?
I absolutely do. But you know me. You know, I'm an optimist. But I do see an end game. We have new tools that are at our delivery. I already talked about the diagnostic tools. We have new surveillance tools. We know, for example, if someone like me, who's HIV positive, if we go on treatment, we're able to suppress our viral load, we can actually reduce the ability to transmit the virus by 96%. That's huge. Now, that's a game changer. But we're not going to get there if people don't get informed about the disease, if people don't get tested, if people don't seek treatment, and if we don't create an environment where we are not stigmatizing people. We have to do those things, and if we do those things, I think we will see the end game.
Phil Wilson, as always, a pleasure talking to you at the Black AIDS Institute in Los Angeles. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gwen.
On our website, we look at how the HIV/AIDS rate in Washington, D.C. compares to nations in sub-Saharan Africa. That's part of a partnership with the Global Post. Frontline's Endgame, AIDS in Black America, airs tonight on most PBS stations.
So, you can't do anything about it if you don't know your status. Okay? You can't do anything about it if you don't know your status. So, we've shared some very personal stories this morning. We've shared some of my stories. We've shared stories from Michael Jackson, who was, again, the teacher. We've shared stories from Steve Harvey, Jennifer Christie, Sean Andrews, Nell, and Philip Wilson. All of these people represent our community. They represent the people who are in this church today, all right? Very, very, very real health issues that we need to empower ourselves to face. So, as a take-home message, what can I do to make my health better? First, maintain a healthy lifestyle. Secondly, protect your heart. That's really a big part of a healthy lifestyle. Secondly, control your diabetes if you have it, okay? You need to be all over it because a little bit of a high sugar just perpetuates itself. Next, get screened for cancer. Again, cancer deaths are preventable. Get screened. Next, avoid tobacco use. Avoid alcohol and substance abuse. And finally, take care of your emotional health, okay? Because emotional health and the way that you deal with stress has a tremendous impact upon your health in ways that we're just beginning to understand. Again, thank you for your time and attention. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Well, what can we say? Excellent information. And when you get that type of information, it's left up to you what the future holds. Again, we want to thank Dr. I got to remember you. John, I forgot your name when you said you were a cowboy. Stewart, Dr. Stewart. I said he lost his job when he said he was a cowboy. You know that? You in Carolina country, man.
I
You
just
know
got
better?
here. I just got here.
Huh?
I just got here.
You say you know my son-in-law, Jason. You know my daughter, Mia. You know who else? You in North Carolina. And you get on in my pulpit telling everybody that you are a cowboy.
I speak the truth.
And he said he speaks the truth. I got to pray about that one. But it's good to know that we have some cowboys that can tell us about cancer and all these other things. But there's been some excellent information that regardless of race, creed, or color, that you can benefit from. You know, St. Peter's, you are a great church, and we believe in reaching out to help our society because our whole life is built around how we reach out to help others. And we have someone in our congregation that is